Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susanna Swiswiki. Coming up, PNG Parliament adjourned until next week. Also,
American leadership ensures the free world is protected.
The US speaks up for Guam and Mariana Islands, and
some of the parts of the island are now getting power supply 24 hours.
Samoa government works to restore power. A motion of no confidence against Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister James Marape will be heard in Parliament on Tuesday next week. This comes after the Supreme Court last week ruled the Parliament's Private Business Committee acted undemocratically in denying it and ordered the House to resume sitting today to consider the motion. Speaker Job Pomats told Parliament he accepted full responsibility for the mistake, but hit out at critics calling for his resignation. RNZ Pacific editor Koroi Hawkins spoke with Papua New Guinea correspondent Scott Whitey about today's sitting and began by asking about the case that was taken to the Supreme Court.
The member for Chuave, James Nomane, went to court seeking clarification over the use of the vote of no confidence laws on the floor of Parliament. And of particular concern to him was how the Private Business Committee, the Parliamentary Private Business Committee, exercised its powers in relation to how it treated the vote of no confidence. So the member for Chuave was seeking to find from the Supreme Court whether that move was unconstitutional, and the court indeed found that it was unconstitutional and that the matter should have been debated adequately on the floor of Parliament. So the court ordered Parliament to resume on the 8th, and that was what happened today. The notice for a vote of no confidence has again been put on the table on the notice board, and Parliament had to adjourn after a few minutes after the Speaker's statement to the 15th of this month. So Parliament will resume again on the 15th to debate that.
In Parliament today, Speaker Job Pomat had a fair bit to say. What were some of the things that he was highlighting about? I think he was referring to public criticism of the committee.
Yes, and I must say that he invited the criticism in the first place by saying that if the Supreme Court reference came out in favor of the opposition, he would resign. So people were looking at what he said previously and were holding him to his word. So they were calling for him to resign. He's defended his stance, saying he won't resign, and that there had been previous instances like this where the Speaker and the Parliamentary Business Committee were not called on to resign. So he's made that statement in such a manner that's brought on a lot of ire from the public as well, saying you need to be as transparent as possible and you need to be held accountable to your word. So if you said you were going to resign, then resign and uphold the integrity of the chair. So that was the situation this morning. He had a lengthy session in the beginning of after he made the announcements. So yeah, he's not going to resign definitely, and the public private business committee members are definitely not going to resign.
Now, for next week, when the motion happens, is there any likelihood that between now and Tuesday, Marape loses the considerable support he's amassed in the House? Or is it likely to be just a formality, so to speak?
Yeah, it is likely to be a formality because there are no indications at the moment that members of Pangu, core members of Pangu, are going to move. I mean, his cabinet is intact. Members of the opposition who had moved on to the other side have been given ministries within Pangu after their return. One good example would be Rainbow Paita, who went over with a considerable number of MPs in the hope that they would be able to unseat the government. So the Pangu coalition is stronger than it was previously last year in November. Having said that, the concerns around the recent laws that have been passed, the Anti-Terror Act, the amendments to the vote of no confidence laws that gives the government another 18 months after a failed vote of no confidence, those will definitely be brought up next week and will be debated because the opposition sees them as contributing factors to what it calls a dictatorial regime in the making, so to speak. So those will definitely pop up on the 15th when this whole vote of no confidence is being debated next week.
Thank you, Thomas Scott. Look forward to hearing and listening and tuning into that debate, and also to your reporting on the issues on the ground. Thank you, Thomas, for time, Blue One Talk.
No worries. Have a good day.
The Indo-Pacific has been at the centre of geopolitical tensions, with the US and China vying for influence. US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth has made it clear any attack on Guam and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands is an attack against the US, and he committed that the US will appropriately respond to any attack. Our Guam correspondent Nina Rao reports.
Standing before military personnel at Andersen Air Force Base, Pete Hegseth made it clear Washington is serious about countering Beijing's influence.
American leadership ensures the free world is protected to advance American interests. And our allies in this neighborhood see the encroachment of communist China. We also stand with our allies to defend against that encroachment and defend American interests.
He repeatedly emphasized that the U.S. is not looking for conflict, but
we're going to be strong so that we are able to deter war. This is not a social experiment. We're not here to pontificate with studies about climate change. You are at the tip of the spear. You're living in a dangerous neighborhood. You are America's power projection platform. The American people rely on you. I rely on you.
His visit comes as the U.S. ramps up military cooperation in the region through joint exercises, new defense agreements, and stronger security ties with allies in the Indo-Pacific.
National security cannot happen without human health security first.
In a meeting with the Secretary, Guam Governor Lulian Guerrero asked the DoD to fund approximately $600 million for a regional medical hospital.
We can make our presentation about the importance of having a capacity in our healthcare system that would be able to address mass casualty. Not just mass casualty from conflict, but mass casualty from natural disasters. And a hospital that will meet also healthcare delivery services, not just for the civilians, but for the military.
Additionally, the governor requested investment to harden utility infrastructure, better roads, and a capable port.
We need gantry cranes to be replaced in our port because the Port Authority here services 30% of goods and services that come in for military purposes. And so that's very important that we also provide a gantry crane that can do that work.
The governor added that if conflict were to break out in the region, it wouldn't be won by missiles, but rather
by taking down our port, taking down our airport, taking down our waters, taking down our electricity, all those things that are necessary for the defense of our people. And so that's why it's very important, Mr. Secretary, to really invest in hardening the infrastructure, putting electricity underground, monitoring our water wells, and so forth.
Experts say his visit wasn't just about reassurance. It was also a message to China. Derek Grossman, a senior defense analyst at RAND, says Guam plays a critical role in that strategy.
Specifically countering China and potentially leveraging our military presence in Guam as part of that strategy. And if it comes to a war within the region, then we will be prepared to fight and win that war.
According to Grossman, Guam's strategic position, home to 3 U.S. military bases, including the recently opened Marine Corps Base Camp Blas, reinforces that role.
We see possibilities of a hub and spoke model linking Guam to CNMI, but perhaps to all of the freely associated states as kind of like a fallback plan within the second island chain, were the first island chain to fall, and likely we would run into some serious Chinese firepower there. And so the idea is to have dispersed forces, hardened shelters, and we would be operating at a distance, but we would have systems that maintain their lethality at that distance.
And part of that lethality is Guam's $1 billion defense system, a model Hegseth said President Trump labeled as the, quote, Golden Dome to protect the U.S. from long-range missile strikes.
We're going to learn a lot here and also forward deploy capabilities that need to exist on American soil. And we're going to continue to stay committed to our presence here.
To conclude his visit, Hegseth committed more than $2 billion worth of investment plans for the Federated States of Micronesia. The funding will go towards projects that will help U.S. forces to operate in the Pacific state. Additionally, CNMI Governor Arnold Palacios told news media that from a closed-door meeting with the Defense Secretary, the U.S. DoD plans to build passive property facilities for storage, warehousing, and fuel in Rota and Saipan. Palacios said the plan includes expanding aprons at Rota and Saipan airports, as well as improving ports across the Commonwealth Islands.
Most Pacific nations and territories have been given the base 10% tariff by the Trump administration, with the exception of Vanuatu, Nauru and Fiji, which have been given tariffs of between 22 to 32%. Some places were missed, though, including Palau. This is despite the other two Compact of Free Association countries being given the baseline tariff. Terence Wood from the Australian National University Development Policy Centre told Caleb Fotheringham, Fiji is likely to be the only nation to feel the direct consequences of the tariffs, but the whole Pacific region will feel the uncomfortable indirect impacts.
So for a small group of countries, and particularly Fiji, the direct impacts will be quite significant. Fiji actually exports quite a lot, particularly bottled water to the US. It's kind of a significant export for Fiji. And Fiji has also been slapped with a tariff of over 30%. When you compare Fiji with other developing countries globally, it's not the worst by any means, but it's come out of the tariff fairly poorly. Then there are some other countries, Nauru and Vanuatu, which have also been kind of inexplicably hit with some fairly high tariffs. However, the direct impacts on them will be less because they're less dependent on exports to the United States. So those are the sort of direct impacts. And then for most other Pacific countries, the tariffs are only 10%, and they don't trade with the US that much anyhow. Then there are a couple of countries, Palau and Niue, which for some unfathomable reason have escaped tariffs altogether. And then in terms of the indirect impacts, though, these will be the most significant for the countries in the Pacific. And the indirect impacts are going to be the effects of the United States' tariffs on other countries, such as China, and how that will affect the global economy. Because if the global economy slows down in general, if there's a major recession, then things such as tourism will collapse, and that'll have a major impact on quite a few Pacific countries.
I think it's really interesting that Palau and Niue were not on the list. Niue I can partially understand, although not really, because Tokelau was obviously on the list, which just seems nuts. But Palau, why do you think they managed to escape the tariff? Because, as you said, Federated States, Micronesia, Marshall Islands, they are both on that list as well.
Yeah, not to mention like the Heard and McDonald Islands or whatever, which are uninhabited rocks, and there's sort of, in the roaring 40s, right? So I don't know. There's no reason. Did someone who was copying and pasting a spreadsheet miss out sort of letters N, O, and P or something? Totally bizarre. No, I mean, I just think they've slipped under the radar somehow, and lucky for them.
Yeah, do you think they will actually slip under the radar, though? Do you think the overall 10% tariff will still apply to everyone, despite if they're named or not?
Yeah, I mean, possibly, or at some point in time in the near future, someone realizes the oversight and decides to whack the 10% tariffs on them. That would be quite likely. So there are a few other countries elsewhere in the world that have been excluded from tariffs, countries such as Russia. But there have been explicit explanations of why those countries have been excluded, whereas Niue and Palau have just not being discussed at all. So it really does seem like an error to me.
Vanuatu and Nauru, in your article, you say that they were almost unlucky because they just had a surplus in 2024. So normally, do they not do much trade with the US at all, and that was just a one-off year, really?
Well, normally, I mean, import about as much as they export. And so because Trump's tariffs are based on trade balances with different countries, the trade balances were sort of effectively zero for Nauru and Vanuatu, or at least that's the average over, say, the last decade. However, in 2024, which seems to be the year that the tariffs were calculated, using data from, Nauru and Vanuatu were both unfortunate enough to have some trade surpluses with the United States, hence the tariffs.
Will there be any positives to the tariffs for Pacific Island nations?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I mean, you can imagine a scenario where China's economy tanks, and so therefore the export of logs from Solomon Islands and Papua New Guinea to China falls, and that would place fiscal pressures on the governments of those countries. However, it might reduce the environmental damage caused by logging in those countries. So that might be a benefit, that, overall any benefits will be more than offset by the damage done to Pacific countries' economies by, the tariffs and what would likely be an ensuing trade war.
What about goods getting cheaper? Could that be a possibility for some commodities?
Yeah, possibly. Once again, I think any benefits will likely be overshadowed by the broader sort of negative consequences of the tariffs and the disruption to international trade.
The Samoan government is hoping power will be fully restored to the main island of Upolu by the end of this month. Prime Minister Fiamea Naomi Matsaafa said the economic impact of the crisis is estimated to cost up to 16% of Samoa's GDP. I spoke with our Samoa correspondent Tipi Atangavaya and began by asking him if people are still rationing their power.
Yes, we are still rationing power for the island of Upolu, but some of the parts of the island are now getting power supply 24 hours with no disruptions. Only some few areas that are still rationing. That's my understanding, and we were told also yesterday in a press conference from the National Emergency Center that some of the other areas have been rationed, but power supply is still continuing in those areas. So it seems that the problem is being fixed bit by bit.
What's the explanation for why some parts of the island have had power with no disruptions, and yet some other parts of Upolu are experiencing disruptions?
Yeah, because I think some of the technical problems in some of the powerhouses have been fixed temporarily, and that's why there's more power supply now for those areas. And good news also that we had the 5 leased generators arrived yesterday afternoon. They were supposed to arrive last Saturday. I think some technical arrangements with the time of the arrival of the ship. So it was arriving yesterday afternoon. So according to the CEO of the Electric Power Corporation in our media conference yesterday, the generators is going to be connected to the main power supply at Fuoso and Fianga, and hopefully those works should be done and then have the generators up and running by the 15th of this month.
I know that there's a state of emergency that will be in place until the end of this month. If power isn't fully restored by then, will the SOE be extended?
Well, that's how it goes because, as you see, it will be ended on the midnight of the 29th of this month. Mm-hmm. But according to the CEO of the EPC, things should be fixed and power should be back to normal supply by the 15th of April.
So just to clarify, the generators are arriving this month rather than August?
No, those the 2 brand new generators purchased from China, I believe, will be arriving in August. So those are the permanent generators for the Electric Power Corporations. The 5 generators leased from a company in New Zealand will be used for 6 months. So by the time those 2 brand new generators, and I believe it's much bigger, will arrive and being fixed and hooked up to the main supply, then that will be the end of the lease of these 5 generators from New Zealand.
How's the tourism industry coping at the moment?
Because business and also households are all affected by the disruptions of the power supply since last month. And I know for sure under the state of emergencies, government is preparing to provide some assistance for those businesses. Their appliances, electrical appliances, have been ruined because of the power disruptions, especially and as well as the families. So that part of the SOE is still under review and consideration. So sometime this week, the disaster committee will be putting out a public notice telling the people, the businesses and the household here in Upolu how that is going to work. But we were told by the chairperson of the committee yesterday that if you are looking at purchasing a appliance like a refrigerator from New Zealand to replace the one that's been damaged because of the power disruptions, you should provide all the documents to the committee for them to know that when your appliance arrives at the wharf, you're not going to pay any tax or any duty.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā soifua.